There we go. All right, try this again. Thank you everyone for coming. My name is Mallory. This is my honors thesis defense. Just a little bit about me. I'm a senior. I am studying environmental design and hoping to get my master's in landscape architecture. And I'm from Toledo, Ohio, which will be clear why that's relevant in a minute here. So the vision for my project was to design a series of parks that go along Swan Creek in Toledo, Ohio. They will connect visitors to the environment, history, and communities that are around them. And these will provide spaces for people to walk, bike, kayak, play, and just relax, and all the while enjoy the creek. So as I started working on this project, I decided to go back and look at people who have done it something similar successfully before. And in landscape architecture, of course, a great person to go to is always Olmsted. So as a case study, I looked at the Emerald Necklace in Boston, Massachusetts. It was designed by Frederick Law Olmsted over the course of the years 1878 through 1895. And this is a series of 6 different parks that Olmsted called a green ribbon that wound through the city. And so these parks were all linear and gave people a chance to walk through the city of Boston, all while staying in a park. And so after looking at this project and learning more about it, some of the things that I wanted to emulate in my own project were that he always strived to provide an escape from the city in nature and parks. He would construct naturalistic landscapes that looked like they could have always been there, even though they were constructed. Olmsted also saw parks as a place that would bring people together, and he provided interconnected parks that would allow easier access for more residents to be able to use the parks. And so those are all things that I wanted to take and use in my own designs. And so then when trying to decide where to study for my project, I was immediately drawn to my hometown of Toledo, Ohio. And something interesting about Toledo is its innate connection to waterways. And so Toledo is located right on the border between Michigan and Ohio, and it's right on Lake Erie. And the Maumee River, which leads into Lake Erie, runs right through Toledo. And then Swan Creek feeds into the Maumee River a little bit upstream of there. But all of these water areas are very much central to what makes up Toledo. And so I decided to focus in on Swan Creek because it's very instrumental in the formation of Toledo as a city. And so Toledo, the whole area used to be covered in what was known as the Great Black Swamp. People couldn't get to Toledo easily, and they didn't want to because it was a swamp. And in 1825, the opening of the Miami-Erie Canal started to change that. So the Erie Canal would lead right up into Swan Creek, and then people would be able to take the canal to the creek to the river. And that connection was where Toledo was born. And because of these waterways, downtown Toledo, right on the riverfront, became a great place for industry. Lots of businesses moved their headquarters to downtown Toledo, and it became a big industrial hub in the Midwest, both along the river and along Swan Creek. And so the history that makes Swan Creek so relevant in Toledo was really intriguing to me. Another thing that's interesting about Swan Creek is that it's an area where a lot of very distinctive neighborhoods all come together. And so if you're driving through this area, you cross a street and you know that you've moved from one community to another. And the creek is one natural border for these, that there's a lot of disconnect from the north to the south side of the creek. And another one of these, which you can see right between Junction in the pink and the Warehouse District in orange, is I-75. And the construction of the interstate really just bisected that Junction neighborhood and they bulldozed right through there and built the highway, and it's caused a big disconnect between that and the rest of these areas. And so the creek provides an opportunity to be able to have places for these people in these very distinctive neighborhoods to come together and form one large community. So as I continued studying Swan Creek and learning a bit more about the communities and the history, I settled on these 3 sites as possible study sites that would be great for parks in this linear system. So I named them all. The first one is named Creeks Bend Park. Next is Underpass Park. And the third is Market Park. And in choosing these sites, there were a few things that I wanted to make sure were consistent across all of them. So one of those was having an innate and clear connection to the creek. I also wanted there to be clear, easy pedestrian access to and from all of these different parks. I thought it was important to have lots of opportunities for varied programming so that the parks would be nice for all sorts of different visitors to come and enjoy. And finally, I wanted to make sure that there were clear linkages between the parks. And so I have developed these master plans of the different programming that would be good in each of these parks. So first up is Creeks Bend Park. And as you can see, it is right here where the creek bends. And one of the key features here could be an observation deck that looks out over the creek and really draws visitors to that as a focal point. It would also have pedestrian entryways that would draw people into the space. And then having the playground and the ball courts, as well as that open green space, gives lots of opportunities for different people to use the space how they want to. These seating areas would sit right up against the dock, right up against the water, and that would also help to connect people to that creek as a feature. And finally, providing a kayak dock would help to create more interest in using the creek, and also that helps with the connection between the 3 parks along the creek. Next is Underpass Park. This is named Underpass Park because it does have several overpasses that go under it, so it's in the underpass. And these really define the space, and they provide a lot of challenges in designing a park here, but also it's a great opportunity that I see also. And so one thing that's more unique about this park is that it goes across both sides of the river, or of the creek, excuse me. And so providing pedestrian bridges from one side to another helps to create connection to the creek, but also it helps connect those 2 neighborhoods that are bisected right there, really bringing those people together into one community space. Another important aspect of the design of all of these that you can see here is a naturalized edge along the water. And so that would involve using native plants and more of like a no-mow type grasses that would help benefit the ecosystem of the creek, and also really make it more of a focus on the creek and that as a complete ecosystem. This park would also include pedestrian entries with signage, a playground, parking so that people can get to it, and a fountain plaza in the middle. And then another feature of this one is a waterside seating decks, and those would extend out over the water so that people would really feel like they're in and a part of there. And third is Market Park. And so just north of here, there is a farmer's market. And this farmer's market is very popular during the summertime. And so during those times when there's lots of people at the market, that would draw people into this space. And then they would know that it's there. And then they would know they'd be able to come back and enjoy it year round. And so something important in this design is having this greenway up at the northeast corner that would draw people from the market along the creek and into the park, including a pedestrian gateway that would be really inviting and draw people in. This park, because of its location a bit closer to downtown, it also has more opportunities for different programming, such as an amphitheater, which could have shows during the summer, and a splash pad for families to come and enjoy also, as well as the playground. There would be lots of ramadas and picnic shelters for people to come and use, as well as a central plaza. And here again, you can see both the waterside seating deck and the seating areas that are adjacent to the creek, as well as that kayak dock, again, which would help to create the connection between the three and get more people using the creek. And so to give you an idea of what one of these parks might look like with more detail, I'm going to tell you more about Underpass Park and the opportunities that that site could provide. And something interesting about this particular site is its history. And so the history of this site and also the remnants of the history that are there are a very clear kind of snapshot into the history of Toledo as a whole. And so this picture is actually from that site, and this railroad bridge goes across, and I'll talk about that a little bit more. So this site has Swan Creek running through it. It was there initially. And then, as I mentioned earlier, the opening of the Erie Canal in 1825. And this passageway remains now. It's called the Anthony Wayne Trail, and it's an important highway that runs through Toledo that gets a lot of use and is really useful in navigating around the city even today. Next was the construction of the railroad. And again, that railroad infrastructure was really important to the development of the city as a whole. And then Collingwood Avenue was built. And something interesting about Collingwood is that there are so many churches that line Collingwood that it's where the phrase Holy Toledo came from. So if you've ever heard someone say Holy Toledo, that's Collingwood Avenue, and it's because it has so many churches lining it. And then again, like I mentioned earlier, Interstate 75 was completed in 1970, and that really bisected this area. As is the story with a lot of highway development during that time, they bulldozed right through this whole area, built the interstate, and then just left the people in the communities fragmented. And so overall, these things all come together to create a site that is very rich in transportation history and a nice snapshot into the history of Toledo as a whole. And again, when you visit the site, you can see the remnants of this. So this top picture on the left is a tree growing out of where those old railroad ties were, and the bridge that went over, that elevated the railroad over the street. Here you can see me for scale. It's a big feature. And it's interesting to see that up against the signs for the highway and for the street, and to see how all of these different aspects come together. And when you walk up to this site, maybe present landscape architects excluded, most people would never walk up to here and say, oh, that would be a great park. I think the only people that really see value in this space right now are the people working on the construction of the highway, because they can keep all of their supplies here. But other than that, I think most people would drive by and think of it as an eyesore and just ignore it. And so a master plan like this would, rather than thinking of those things as an eyesore, it embraces those features. And I'm now going to go through and show you some sketch renderings of what some of these different elements might look like in this space with the highways as a backdrop. And so walking across the bridge to get across the park, this is what it might look like. As you look down the creek, you can see those waterside seating decks, a pedestrian bridge across the creek, and again, those native buffers along the edge, providing for that ecosystem and a more naturalized edge to the creek rather than it being so constructed. Next, you'd be walking down the sidewalk and come to the pedestrian entry, and it would be very welcoming. There's signage that would be consistent across all of the entries that would give a distinct character to the park, as well as a wide sidewalk that would really draw people into the space to enjoy. The Fountain Plaza would also be a very welcoming space that would help give character to this park. Something that is part of the unique opportunities of having these overpasses is that there's a chance to turn the pillars that hold up the highways into a focal point and using them as art rather than trying to ignore them. Because in most parks, you have to construct shade structures so that if people want to get out of the sun, they have a space. But in a park here, that's already there for us, so we could embrace it. And so using the faux brick pattern that's already on these pillars, you could paint them with a mosaic style, using the colors of native plants to really draw attention to them and also to provide connection to those native naturalized buffers along the creek. And then the fountain in the middle would have materials that matched those pillars, using those same colors and stone to make it cohesive and all work together. Then as you're walking through the park, those mosaics continue to brighten up the space and again, provide that character and consistency throughout. I think an important thing would be to have the path winding along with the river or with the creek, excuse me, and to have it following that path that's already there rather than a straight line or a zigzag or just some other random pathway, to have it following the curve of the water. Again, with those naturalized edges that really bring attention to that as an ecosystem and as a feature. And then those pedestrian bridges would be very wide and welcoming and easy for people to use. It would connect both sides of the creek and add that connection again between those communities. And in this rendering, you can also see that waterside seating deck that would again give people more access and more use of the creek. And so in order to truly make this into a connected system, something I think would be important would be to take those buffer naturalized edges and carry them beyond just the limits of these parks. And so finding spaces all along the creek from where it connects with the river all the way upstream, I think that would be really important for, again, caring for that ecosystem, creating the character, and connecting all of the parks with the environment. And another way to add more of that connection might be to add a bike trail along the creek as well. And so having this follow the curves of the creek and using that as the base for it, people would be able to bike, walk, run, and just really enjoy the creek as a focal point and as a feature and as an amenity. And so by providing this path, it would create connections between the parks and to the creek as a whole. And so as I've been working on this, I have come up with lots more ideas that would be good next steps. And so if I was able to keep working on this project, I think it would be important to do an ecological inventory of the ecosystems along the creek to really understand what we're working with and what it needs. And then going along with that, a water quality survey for the creek, because we know that the water quality is not great, but again, understanding the conditions that are there so that we can help to improve them and foster it to be healthy in the future would be really important. And finally, more of a study into the impacts on local communities. The communities surrounding here have had a past of redlining and gentrification before. And so gentrification would be something really important to try and avoid, because as a community park, these should be for these people and not as something to try and push them out. So that would be important to consider as well. So here are my sources that I used for my presentation. Thank you all so much for listening. And if you have any questions, I would be more than happy to answer those now.
Hi, Mallory. Can I ask a question?
Yes.
First of all, I absolutely love the connection to the creek, the pedestrian accessibility and the accessibility to each other, to each of the three parks. I think that's a genius idea. My question is, what are or are there challenges with in this type of construction with so much water? I mean, there are a lot of waterways, and I don't know what the infrastructure would, what you would need to, or if how well it would work with so much water around, underwater.
Yeah, that's a really good question. I definitely think that looking into the infrastructure that would take would be an important next step, and ensuring that like flooding wouldn't be an issue, or that those pathways wouldn't interfere with those waterways. So I think that would be an important part of continuing to learn about this in the planning phase.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, cool.
Thank you.
Mallory, this is Tomas. Can I ask a question?
Yes, please.
So I was just wondering, I love the design and I love the connectivity of the city to nature. I was wondering, did you have a chance to connect with the community or any stakeholders in the process of kind of thinking about this?
I haven't gotten to yet, but I think that's a really important point. Moving any further with it would be to check in with stakeholders and community members as stakeholders, to ensure that the design is well suited for them and would serve them as a community. I think that would be an important part for sure.
Great job.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Mallory, I can go next if no one else is jumping in.
Of course.
Absolutely great job. See if I can turn my camera. Oh, and I disappeared. Absolutely a great job. I'll just sum it up as Holy Toledo. I had no idea, so I definitely learned something. And I just want to say that I really enjoyed your hand sketch renders and the perspectives. I liked the color palettes and just everything you did, especially with the middle. I think the middle site where you have the the bridges going over. So I really thought that was great. The background research was also good. I liked the maps. So again, very nice. The one thing I'd say in terms of kind of the GIS background, mapping background, some of the imagery you had used in the presentation was a little blurry. So just be careful if try to get high resolution imagery if you can. It can easily detract from it, and careful with some text over some of these images. If it's blurry and you've got small fonted text, it can be hard to pick up sometimes. But this is such nitpicky little things, very nuanced. And then I guess I was going to ask too, kind of following Tomas's question, not necessarily with stakeholders, but did you actually do any demographic research, or do you know the communities there, like the gender, race, age, any of those sorts of things?
I did do a little bit of research on that. I definitely would want to continue doing more research on that. I think that's really important to consider. And I think that those demographics do make a big difference in what the design needs. One of the things that I did learn from doing that research was that there are a lot of kids in this area and families with young children. And so having those places to play and having flexible space for them to use how it suits them, I think was an important thing that I took from that.
That's awesome. Well, great job, Mallory.
Thank you.
I like it.
So yeah, to piggyback on Nicholas there, Holy Toledo, right? I mean, having grown up here and working here, this is really amazing work, Mallory. I'm really blown away, honestly. The research that you did into the neighborhood areas and the connectivity, that overlay of all the transportation that has happened through this area. And then, overlaying it with the green space corridor. There is so much focus on water quality and access to green space right now. The water quality piece that Toledo has gone through with, so blue-green algae issues and issues of drinkability for our reservoir in the city. And then just this connection to nature and the kind of mental health benefits that it has to everybody, I think just comes at really a great time. The Toledo Metro Parks is investing over, I'd say probably easily $100 million in the riverfront development right now in the next 3 years. And I could see this work leading to easily a next phase to connect, this Swan Creek River, Swan Creek connection, waterway connection through the Junction neighborhood to connect that up, because it is a community that has been cut off from the downtown. There has been discussion with the city traffic engineers about some local Ohio grants to reconnect neighborhoods through bikeways. So everything that you described here is so spot on with active things that are going on right now that really leads to really exciting, almost leap ahead in time to look at some of this stuff. So really, really good job. Can't wait to see this progress.
Thank you so much.
Hey, Mallory. Thanks. I did learn some things. I did not learn, never knew about the Holy Toledo and everything. I love the history, and I really like the idea of connecting the neighborhoods back together. That's just, the more I hear about how neighborhoods have been bisected by interstates and destroyed that way, I think it's nice to reconnect it. And why not do it under the underpasses? It's just not being used for anything else.
Yeah. Well, I'm glad I taught you about Holy Toledo, Sharon. That's good.
Hi, Mary. This is Jingwen.
Hi.
It's great job you have done. It's truly a great piece of work, and you have considered many aspects, socially, ecologically. I guess maybe moving forward, and there's a couple of things you may start looking into in more depth. Things like the connectivity you mentioned, it will be invaluable to see where the access point could be, and maybe even using the water as one of the transportation network potentially, and probably need to identify where are the access points, and from multiple, whether it's transportation from the waterways, from the bus, from bikes, and other types of connectivities that can use the park as the hub and kind of help that transition. I think that would really make the parks as kind of elevating sites for connecting all these resources together.
Yeah.
So, and and I appreciate your point on looking into the environmental justice gentrification issue for the community. It will be also helpful when you do analysis to show the current demographic, and perhaps if you can show the demographics change over time, so that I'm like me, we don't know the area well, then it will be helpful to know what's the kind of demographic situation in that context.
Yeah, I think that would be a good thing to add for sure. Thank you.
So things like that, and Nick's suggestion on GIS will help to help you to map those things. So yeah, but great, good job.
Thank you.
Sure. Well, I agree with all the other commenters. It's amazing, amazing project. I think I was thinking because you're aspiring to be a landscape architect. Is it okay if I give you some critique?
Yes, please.
Okay. Well, and I want to put it in, you know, in quotes. I think as your BS ED capstone, this is like amazing.
Thank you.
And I think you really presented something that could get people excited about this idea, and maybe you continue on or somebody else. Can you pull up the underpass plan?
Yes. The master plan for it?
Yeah. Question. There you go. So one, the clarity of your verbal presentation and graphics was great. And,
Thank you.
You know, you had a really nice progression. And while I've never been to Toledo, I started to kind of get my mind around this. So I think that was great. One of the things you talked about was connectivity. And so maybe if you work on this more as you go on in your MLA studies, I think, you know, this is a great one to help, to Ching Wen's comment, us understand the context better. And even if it would have just been some labels in each of those quadrants of what those land uses are. And so to the upper left, like I'm thinking, is that residential going off that direction?
Yeah, there's a neighborhood up there.
Okay, so to me, you had a couple pedestrian entry points. And this is where I was like, oh, I want you to be more aggressive.
Mm-hmm.
And let's make sure we get those folks connected to this park.
Yeah.
And so I don't know if the right way to do it is take some of that land that's along the river, which you mentioned at the end, which was great. But should there be a bridge there, or should there be something else there to really get that neighborhood connected? So I think that fits into your bigger scheme.
Yeah.
And it's just getting your intent to match your proposal.
Mm-hmm.
And so that was kind of one example where I think even just labeling the context always makes us, it's a reminder that we're always aware of it. And then maybe that changes your plan a little bit.
Yeah.
And then the other one I was going to ask you to go to was the plan at the end that had the green, that had the trail, that one. And I really like that you included this at the end. And I'll tell you one thing that I'm super impressed with is it was the amount of network and systems thinking you put into this, that you just didn't show us a park along the creek. You showed us 3 parks along the creek. You thought about how they were connected, and then you came back at the end and you proposed the trail and the, what did you call it? Not wild space.
The naturalized edges.
The naturalized edges.
Yeah.
And so I think that's great. I was looking at this though, and something maybe you think about is the middle park, underpass park, I think.
Mm-hmm.
Does that want to have a naturalized edge on the bottom of the graphic or the south,
Mm-hmm.
so that there's this kind of continuous naturalized edge all the way to the river? And then the upper part is the bike trail. And one of the things I heard in your presentation was there was lots of focus on recreation,
Mm-hmm.
which is great. You know, that's why we have parks departments. But increasingly, like we recognize, and even in your presentation, you acknowledge like there's ecological values, cultural values, all those things. And here's where I think we can match intentions with proposals is, you know, maybe we load the north side as the recreation corridor.
Mm-hmm.
That's where we get the kids with bikes to be loud and everybody. But maybe we reserve the southern edge of the creek as a wildlife corridor. And it has a continuous wild edge all the way to the creek. And that's I think, you know, going to get your MLA is fantastic, because this is I think so much opportunity for recreation departments to now figure out how do we deal with resiliency and ecological function and all these things, and build that into our open space plans, because increasingly they have to do both. But the fact that you had this in at the end, I was super excited, you know, that you kind of tied it all together. You know, I also really like your sketches.
Thank you.
Those do so much to kind of visualize, and I really like your technique of just the photograph and then you drew over it and then you gave us the finished one. Keep working on that. That'll take you, carry you a long way doing those things. And then, you know, as a designer, the only other thing I would tell you to do is be more aggressive, right? You took a few parcels of vacant, neglected land,
Mhm.
but I can even see some kind of little tinier ones, and I'm like, go take those too.
Yeah.
You know, when we're dreaming big, it's weird. I worked for City of Phoenix Parks for like 6 years. Nobody ever came and said, "Oh, make your park a little bigger." They always said, "Make it a little smaller,"
Mhm.
or take a little money out. You know, and so go big, and then you can kind of shrink down, and then know what those things that you're critical to maintain. Like
Mhm.
if it's the continuous bike path, if it's the wildlife corridor, that there's some kind of non-negotiable items in there. And maybe the only other one is, you know, if you continue this, would be to kind of bring up the ecological function and analysis.
Yeah.
And then I think the other one is the cultural piece to it, which I appreciate you acknowledged. Are you from Toledo?
Yeah.
Okay.
Born and raised.
Yeah, so I guess that was the only thing I wanted to see maybe in the plan is I assume there's some, well, you told us Holy Toledo, but I wanted to see something show up in the plans.
Yeah.
That there was some connection to this neighborhood named something or something. I really like the art component you brought into it. But, you know, then I was like, well, but how can we just make this park be, it can only be in Toledo?
Yeah.
And so, and that probably takes more time, you know, to kind of do that. So your trajectory is awesome.
Thank you.
That'll be my last comment.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
I would just echo that. I mean, they've been giving you lots of feedback throughout the semester, so the opportunity to say it's been a huge pleasure working with you. It's super exciting. Just to see, just to know that your interests are to going into landscape architecture, because you are very
Thank you.
landscape architect. The way you think about things systematically, because you brought all of that stuff in on your own. I kind of just, that's a good idea.
Fix that
Keep
bench.
doing that. Yeah. Fix that thing. But of course, I have a weakness for history, so I love the historical part of it in what you brought to it. And I've been kind of making notes on the more research, because in all of the presentations I've seen over the years that I've been doing this, it actually is usually something maybe graduate students do, but not very often. Undergraduates say, what I need to investigate further is this list. And I just kept thinking, what they're making here. And then I added the comments that other people have made. It's like, you have a couple of master's projects that you can do with this and carry it further. And I do think, like with the ecological connections that you made here, to see it like blow it up to the whole city.
Yeah.
You know, to see how do those connections work. But that's like masters, that's save that for later.
Yeah.
Because I think in the amount of time you had in the background that you have, a really strong project.
Thank you. Appreciate it. Were there any more questions from people on Zoom?
Mallory, this is Hunter. I did have a question still.
Sure.
Overall, the design is incredible and exciting. And coming from the business world, my next logical question would be, well, what's it going to cost? Do you have any sort of rough estimates on the capital needs for a project like this?
Well, not yet. I was trying to really focus on kind of without those, as a student, it was a unique opportunity to work on a project without having to worry about those constraints. And thinking, oh, putting this thing that like sits out over the water, that would be cool. And building this big fountain, like great. And not having to worry about how much all of those cost. But I definitely think that an important, like very next step would be to start looking at that and seeing what kind of funding would be needed to start shaping this into more of a reality then.
Absolutely. And as some of your other commenters said, shoot for the stars on your first shot. So I think including all those things is absolutely the right move, but knowing what they cost, like you said, not necessarily a student's job, but that's the logical next step. So excellent work. It's really incredible and inspiring, I think.
Thank you.
About the time when Joe was working in the Parks Department, was working on the Sonora Preserve master plan. So it's seeing the parallels of that. And that, how many years was that?
So that plan's been adopted for 22 years.
Wow.
And it's about 70% complete.
Wow.
But how many years and how many people worked on getting to the point that was actually documented?
There was
It
30 years
included
of effort
implementation.
before that.
When Hunter asked that question of implementation, it's like that controlling anything of the Sonora Preserve, because how do you finance that as a big, is a very important question.
Yeah.
It was many years.
Yeah.
Working on it, graduate students. Now doing the inventory, there was an ecological inventory. So this is the beginning of,
All of that.
yeah, of something that could be really big. So don't feel like you have to have it all done.
Yeah.
By next week. But to keep a point of maybe adding to that further research, I've just been jotting down the notes that people ask you about stuff like
Yeah.
to include those things
Yeah.
in there. I didn't, my ears pricked up with all the funding that Tim was talking about. So definitely
Started
found a
saying
lot of
million and I was like,
Yeah,
whoa.
and he rattled off the names really quickly and I didn't get them down, but definitely follow up in terms of things that you can connect to.
Yeah,
In terms of that funding.
definitely.
I have one other question. Do you see the far left of your screen there?
Yeah.
I can see a baseball diamond in a big green space.
Hmm.
Do you know what that is?
Not off the top of my head.
It's okay. If I was
I
gonna
feel like I
have-
do somewhere, but I don't want to say the
Yeah.
wrong thing.
No, that's okay. If I was gonna have you do, if you had 2 more weeks
Yeah.
in this semester, what I would tell you would be to do a cover of the existing open spaces.
Hmm.
Because I think, that's some sort of recreation space. Maybe it's a public park, maybe it's part of a private school. who
Yeah.
knows what it is.
I think it's a
But-
park.
It's a park, yeah. So, that's even going to strengthen your diagram
Mhm.
of this connected open space more, is to kind of show maybe where a few of those are already along the river.
Yeah.
And then, there may be some that are just a block away. Well, maybe just a really nice streetscape
Hmm.
connects one block, and now, your, I don't know what this is, 30 acres of open space, 50 acres of open space, really is part of a 500-acre network of open space.
Yeah.
And I think just, if you continued on this, more and more information like that is
Mhm.
gonna, it just makes your argument more compelling.
Yeah. Thank you.
Toledo's version.
Yeah. Were there any more questions from anyone on Zoom?
This is where we all clap for you.
Yeah.
Great work, Mallory. Woo!
Thank you.
Really good job. Very, very impressive.
Thank you.
Hey, make my drive to and from work a lot nicer right now.
All right, well, really quick before everyone goes, I just wanted to say another thank you to everyone for coming and listening and asking questions. And a really special thank you to Rebecca for being my thesis director and helping me through this whole process, as well as to Tim and Nick for being on my committee and all of your help. I definitely couldn't have gotten here without all of your help. So thank you so much. And I hope everyone has a great day.